Now broadcasting from the Next Gen Conservative Studio in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report with Sam Whitfield.
Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Whitfield Report podcast, and I am the aforementioned Sam Whitfield. In today's audio-only podcast, I apologize for those of you who like to watch on YouTube as well. But for today, that's just how things crumble. It's audio-only, and so yeah. And with that in mind, folks, I want to cover a few things related to the Joe Rogan Spotify controversy. Last week on the Saturday show, we had Matt from Foulball Productions on the podcast, and we covered a lot of the Joe Rogan controversy regarding Neil Young and Joni Mitchell pulling their catalogs from Spotify, along with a few other musicians who have done so as well. So I'm not going to rehash the entire episode. If you guys want to watch or listen to that, that is available either on YouTube, on the Whitfield Report channel, or you can listen to that on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. At any rate, though, there are some more developments in the Rogan story. Really one, and it's one I find to be very weird, quite frankly. So, apparently, there's this sizzle reel going around of Joe saying the N-word on the podcast. And the way it's edited together, it makes Rogan out to sound like a racist, essentially. Now, I find this notion that Joe Rogan is a racist to be patently ridiculous when you consider the fact that he's had Chris Rock on the podcast before. He just had Snoop Dogg on the podcast, like, right before Christmas. And Snoop Dogg, being a rapper, says the N-word a lot too. A lot of these rappers do. It's almost, common parlance for them. So there's this N-word reel going around that someone made, and I guess it's not a new sizzle reel either. It's a compilation that someone made a few years ago of Joe saying the N-word, and now because of this whole Spotify controversy and people trying to cancel him, it's made the rounds again, and The Rock, who had previously stood behind Joe Rogan, is now backing off on his support for Rogan, which honestly I don't understand, and I'm not talking specifically about The Rock per se. I have my issues with The Rock, but I don't think he is necessarily the only one to blame for a lot of this stuff. I think he's just, an actor trying to do what he can to, stay within the good graces of Hollywood, because he is one of the, Hollywood darlings right now. With that being said, folks, here's the deal with the Joe Rogan N-word reel. Right? Joe Rogan is not a racist, and anyone who has listened to the podcast for any amount of time knows that to be true, pretty much. he, may say some colorful things, but he's a comedian. And comedians say colorful and often crude things 95% of the time. In fact, hell, if you go back and listen to the Joe Rogan Experience, any of the early episodes from 2009 really to 2015, when he really started to, become big, a lot of his podcasts were just him and his comedian buddies, talking like sex stories and, interviewing porn stars. And, hell, Fleshlight, or whatever that company is called, they used to be one of the main sponsors of both the Joe Rogan show and the Adam Carolla show way back in the day. And I remember, I was in high school, and, when I first started getting into podcasts around that time. And first off, I couldn't believe that I was hearing the word fuck on, podcast or, on something pretty close to radio, because that's what podcasting has essentially replaced, is radio and the radio talk show, in a sense. And I'll get to that in a bit. But needless to say, a lot of those early Rogan episodes were pretty raw, in their language and in their content. And they were funny, though. That was the thing. You were tuning into early episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience and the Adam Carolla show and others like it because they were wild and crazy. Because it was something so different at the time. And the fact that comedians were uncensored and they were telling raunchy stories. That's one of the reasons why the format has done so well, podcasting-wise. Not necessarily because it's raunchy, but because in a podcast, you have the freedom to pretty much say whatever you want on the internet, as long as you're not threatening someone or, intending to cause harm in someone. But, in the vast majority of cases, you can pretty much say whatever you want, and there aren't any repercussions or fines like there are with the FCC. Although there are rumors that they may be trying to change that now, and we'll get to that later on in the show. But anyway, getting back to my initial point about Rogan, right? Most people understand the fact that Rogan is not a racist. And the people who put together the N-word reel and who, posted it to the internet, they know he's not racist either. But they're trying to cancel him because he's a powerful voice. They hate the fact that he is discussing actual controversial subjects with people and allowing people from both sides of an argument to have a platform. And they don't like that. So what are they going to do? They're going to make him the center of a controversy. And they're going to demonize him as a bad guy, and they're going to try and get rid of him. And at this point, it doesn't seem like he's going away. With that being said, there's a new development regarding the Joe Rogan Experience, which is that 77 episodes got released this past weekend. Now, like I said, I discussed all that with Matt from Foulball Productions. So again, I encourage you to check that episode out from last week if you haven't already. However, the new development regarding that is that apparently Joe Rogan himself deleted those episodes. He chose to, of his own free will, it's looking like, rather than Spotify mandating him. Now, listen, I'm of two minds on this, okay? Part of me thinks that he should have never deleted those episodes, right? He should have stood his ground and kept them up, and, dude has enough money, he's not really hurting financially, so he, on the one hand, he could have just said, fuck you, I'm keeping him up. There was no reason to delete those episodes on the one hand, and I'm a little perplexed as to why he did, right? So that's the argument on one hand. On the other hand, though, part of me can understand why he would just want to delete those episodes, because look, when you say spicy things and they cause a controversy, the mob, whether it be from the far right or the far left, or in some cases both, when they descend on you, it becomes a whirlwind and a shit show. Trust me, I know from personal experience, and I'm not even famous compared to Rogan. So I understand the temptation, definitely, to delete an episode or to, and say, fuck it, it's not worth it. Especially, right, when you're someone like Rogan and you have a staff that, you have people that you have to take care of. Because keep in mind, even though people only see Joe Rogan or his producer Jamie on camera, or hear them both on the podcast, I believe Rogan has about a staff of 12 people total that do behind the scenes stuff with running the studio, running the cameras, maintaining the lot that the studio is on in both Texas and in California. So he might not have a large team of people, but he does have a team of people that he has to take care of. And when the mob is coming after you, they're also coming after your people via proxy. And if it were just him and, he were the one running everything, I might be a little more, pushy to say, come on, Joe, just tell the mob off, right? Just tell them to go fuck themselves, right? But when you have a staff of people that you have to take care of, there definitely is that consideration that, maybe it's not worth the controversy. So, in regards to him deleting those episodes, like I said, I am torn. Because on the one hand, I don't think he should delete those episodes at all, right? Understand that. I'm not saying that it was good that he did that. With that being said, if Spotify was saying something like, delete those episodes or we'll delete them for you, and then fire you or something like that, then, you got to do what you got to do to take care of your staff and, their families as well as your own. I'm not saying that's what happened because, like I said, it's looking like Joe Rogan decided to do that on his own. It doesn't look like there was any pressure from Spotify. But we don't know. For those of you asking, because I have gotten a couple emails and tweets, and DMs about this since the Saturday show, I won't be taking the Whitfield Report off of Spotify. As I have said in the past, Spotify and Anchor have been very good to this podcast, especially when the cancel culture mob came after this show a few years ago. And Anchor and Spotify stood their ground behind me when I was getting negatively review bombed. And, they stood behind me, and I am grateful for that. And like I said, at this point, it doesn't seem like they were the ones who influenced Rogan's decision. It doesn't seem like they pushed him to, take those episodes off. So until there's evidence otherwise, I'm not taking the podcast off of Spotify. In fact, I'm hoping soon that we'll be able to, move the video podcast over to Spotify as well, in addition to YouTube. Because let me tell you, Spotify and on the audio podcast feeds, there are episodes of the Whitfield Report that are no longer on YouTube because YouTube removed them, or struck them down. So that's an aside. Yeah, Spotify might not be perfect, but they're still better than YouTube, per se. So I'm sticking by that. Overall, like I said, when Matt from Foul Ball Productions was here, I think this is a blatant attempt at cancel culture. I don't think Rogan should have to apologize for anything. I understand. And here's the other point I want to make, right? Because this is the other thing that people have brought up, right? One of the reasons why Rogan might have deleted the episodes is because Rogan is not looking to get into controversy, right? He has said himself, I'm a comedian, I'm a dummy, no one should listen to me. I don't really have a bone in the fight politically. Now, he has said that before, and I understand the mentality that you have, Joe, and I don't know, I doubt Joe Rogan is going to listen to this, but you never know. I've had people listen to this podcast, who have later DM'd me, and I've been surprised by some of the names who have tuned into the podcast, not gonna lie. So on the off chance that Rogan does hear this, and the one in a million chance that little me gets Rogan's attention, here's what I would say, sir. I understand that you didn't start the Joe Rogan Experience out to be a lightning rod. I understand that. I understand that you just wanted to fuck around with your friends, who are comedians, and you just wanted to bullshit and have conversations, and whatnot. I understand that you do your podcast organically. With that being said, your podcast has become part of the cultural zeitgeist, Joe. You get more viewers and listeners per episode, sometimes, than the Super Bowl does, which is coming up this weekend, by the way. And I think one of the reasons why the Joe Rogan Experience is so popular is because it's not trying to be part of the culture war, right? It's not trying to push an agenda. It's just simply allowing people to have conversations with each other about raw topics. Sometimes about serious topics, sometimes about funny topics, but in the end, it is a podcast where people from differing, ideologies, different occupations, different fields, can come together to share ideas with each other. And the fact that it is raw and unscripted is why people listen to it, and why the podcasting medium in general has become so successful. People don't want the 10 to 15 minute sound bites from cable news anymore. People don't watch the evening news anymore because it's so controlled and because it is so centralized. Podcasting, especially Joe's podcast, has become the epicenter for conversation, arguably, in many circles. So while I understand that it wasn't your intention, Joe, to become the tip of the spear for really the public square and the public discourse, it is because you had no intention of pushing an agenda or doing anything that your show has become so successful. And I would urge you guys not to, censor yourselves, not to bow before the powers that be, and to keep the podcast raw and uncensored. Whether it be with Spotify or whether it be with Rumble or with Odyssey. I know that those two companies have made offers to acquire the Joe Rogan experience. And listen, I don't think Joe needs to go to Rumble or Odyssey. Worst comes to worst, Joe probably has enough money at this point where he can do something like Anthony Cumia has, or something that Tim Pool has, and he can just build his own infrastructure, right? And even if people had to pay for it, I mean, I would certainly pay for it. I already pay for Compound Media, which is Anthony Cumia's platform. And I certainly would have a problem paying for the Joe Rogan experience, and I doubt others would too. So, Joe, just keep the podcast uncensored and keep it raw and unfiltered. That would be my request to you. In regards to podcasting in general, though, my friend Ray, who used to host a podcast called Eye on the Empire, I don't know if he still hosts the podcast, but he did for like a year and a half to 2 years, and it's a good podcast, but he just doesn't have the time to do it daily anymore like he wants to, so he mainly sticks to Twitter. At Eye on the Empire on Twitter. Go follow him. Terrific guy. But one of the points that he made on Twitter was that if they can regulate Joe Rogan, they can regulate podcasting in general. And he tweeted out the other night a scenario in which people would have to get licenses from the FCC in order to do a podcast, right? And I see where he's going with that. And he's kind of on the side that I'm at, where censoring free media is, dangerous. Trying to regulate is dangerous, right? And 5 years ago, the notion of regulating a podcast would have been completely ridiculous and out of the, that would have been out of the question 5 years ago, right? But now there have been whispers of, does the FCC step in and regulate the internet and mediums like podcasting and whatnot, and regulate mediums like YouTube? There's been a lot of talk about it. And I don't like that idea at all. It's bad just on so many reasons. Now I can tell you, here's what will happen here's what will happen to the medium of podcasting if the FCC decides to step in and require people to get licenses to do podcasts. If that is the case, the podcast medium will die. It will just simply die. By which I mean, sure, you might have organizations like NPR and CNN and the big news groups that also have podcasts, and they may be able to pay for licenses, but the vast majority of people who listen to podcasts listen to independent podcast hosts like myself who are independent creators. And so if the FCC requires licenses for, regular people, such as myself, to do podcasts, and they charge money to do it, and they start regulating what we can and cannot say on said podcast, well, I guarantee you, people are just going to start podcasting. People are just going to stop podcasting, I should say. And when the independent content creators stop doing that, the medium will just die. It will. Because independence from radio, independence from the FCC and, terrestrial medium, and the restrictions on those platforms, that was why podcasting became a thing in the first place. And so if the government continues to say that they're going to regulate said medium, well, then podcasting is done. And I hope it doesn't come to that, because I love doing this. I've been podcasting since I was 14 years old, and I'm now 27 years old. And I'm just getting started. I'm not even close to where I want to be in this medium. I'm just getting started. But by God, if the medium starts to get censored federally, right? If it starts to get regulated, I can't continue to do the show the way I want to. And I'm not the one who will be in that position. And the medium will just die off. And that's just the sad reality. I don't see how podcasting stays alive and stays viable if it gets regulated. So that's that. Now, finally, in terms of cancel culture, I've talked a bit about this on Twitter before, and I've written articles over the years on this on my blog. And I talked about this a little bit last year when Sean Connery passed away, and actually that's more like 2 years ago now, with it being 2022. I have said that cancel culture is, toxic. I think we can all agree on that in general, that it's a bad idea. But one of the things that has always struck me as being particularly odd is canceling dead people and dead public figures. Now, we saw this happen back in 2020 after Sean Connery passed away, where someone tried to cancel Sean Connery and rather tarnish his legacy by saying that, allegedly back in like 1964 or something, while filming one of the James Bond movies, I think it was while filming Goldfinger, Sean Connery had like allegedly, sexually assaulted a woman who wasn't the main Bond girl, but was one of the, Bond girl extras that he was flirting with. I seem to recall someone made up a story that there's that scene in Goldfinger where he meets up with Felix Leiter, and then he smacks the girl on the ass and says, off, scram, it's man talk time, or something like that. And supposedly, like, some relative of hers said that, like, he sexually assaulted her, like, on the set or something. And it wasn't believable at all, right? But at the same time, like, you could tell that, again, the cancel culture mob was coming after him. Why? Because he's a symbol of toxic masculinity. And they brought up the whole, they brought up his Playboy interview, too, where he said, jokingly, every once in a while a woman needs a good smack in order to, maintain, in order to, be maintained or something like that. Right? Just petty stuff, but nevertheless they were trying to, cancel him and tarnish his legacy because of that, right? Well, apparently there's this new documentary series that has come out on A&E about Hugh Hefner. And this documentary series supposedly reveals the dark side of Playboy, and it's presented by Holly Madison and Kendra Wilkinson, who, they weren't Playboy playmates, they were Hefner's girlfriends, and they were reality TV stars. They were on that weird show that was on back when I was in high school called The Girls Next Door. It was about Hef and his living girlfriends, and Holly wrote a book back in like 2015 or so, like just weeks after his death, like claiming that like he molested her and forced her to take Quaaludes and whatnot, and all this stuff, right? And what's weird is they've made a documentary series about all this in an effort to cancel Hef, basically. Now look, I understand that there are members of my audience who are socially conservative, more so than I am. And they don't necessarily like the idea of what Playboy, stands for or represents and whatnot. If that is your prerogative, fine. I'm kind of a libertarian when it comes to that sort of thing. What one does with their sexuality is one's own business, so long as they are consenting adults, they're not harming children, etc., etc. And for the record, too, just while we're on the subject, my uncle was a collector of Playboy. And when he passed away, guess who inherited his collection? You guessed it, I did. And I have added a few issues myself to that collection. So, just putting that out there, that I might have a bias in this situation. But with all that being said, the bigger issue here is that this documentary has come out like 5 years later after Hef's death, right? I think Hef died back in 2015, I think it was. And now this documentary that is supposedly supposed to take down Hef's legacy is coming out like 6 years after his death. And my question is, why? There's no point to it whatsoever. If there was anything damning, if Hef really was a bad guy, and he did do something criminal, why not speak up when he was still alive? Right? There was almost an 8-year gap between when the Girls Next Door series ended and when Hef died. So there was plenty of time for Holly Madison and these other women to come forward while Hef was still alive and make these claims, and possibly take him to court if they were true. And I'm not saying that Hef was a saint. I'm not saying that he was a perfect man. I don't think any, guy is, especially in the entertainment industry. But, all of these allegations that have come out, with him being tied to Epstein and whatnot, and like running, underground like sex trafficking rings and all these other conspiracies that people have pulled out of thin air. I don't buy them at this point. Just because it seems like it's fabricated nonsense. And even if it is true, let's just say that Hef is, the most horrible guy out there, right? What are you going to do? The man's been dead for 6 years. There's no point, in desecrating him, other than money from the Hefner family, which I'm guessing is what these women want, that are accusing him of this. And so, it just seems like a big nothing burger, and, a couple of playmates, more than a few playmates, and other Playboy staff members have come out and said that these allegations against him are not true at all. That he was a fair man and a gentleman and whatnot. So, again, I'm not saying he's the perfect guy out there, but he definitely isn't he definitely didn't seem to be the demon and the villain that people are portraying him as in the cancel culture cult, as it were. So anyway, those are just kind of my takes on the whole thing. I might do like a video on Hef more specifically, and I do know that there are 2 playmates that have a podcast about Playboy's history as a company and what Hef was actually like. So shout out to Karina Harney and Echo Johnson, who host the Bunny Chronicles podcast. I know there have been a few podcasts about how bad Playboy is and that kind of dark history, but they're the ones who are kind of telling the other side of the story on that. So check them out if you are so inclined to. And in regards to Hef's situation with that whole thing, like I said, I just think it's ridiculous to cancel a dead man. Especially since there's nothing to gain from him other than tarnishing his reputation. So those are my 2 cents on the matter. Maybe I'll have Karina and Echo on the podcast at some point to share their perspective. That would be a very interesting conversation. And I know it would also probably, say some of the people who say, "Oh, Sam, you don't have enough women on the podcast." Well, that might be a possible answer to that, so we'll see in the future. But anyway, folks, I think that will do it for today's program. We will be back on Saturday with Mr. Whiskey. He'll be joining us to discuss the Ethan Ralph versus Mr. Medicare live stream that happened this past weekend. So he'll be joining us on Saturday night at 10 p.m. for the live stream show. So be on the lookout for that. And other than that, folks, have a good night or a good day. God bless and God save this great nation from wherever you are in the past, present, future hour. And I'll see you on the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to The Whitfield Report on the NGC Network. Please visit Sam's website at www.thesamwhitfield.com and support Sam on Patreon at patreon.com/Whitfield Report. Until next time, God bless, God save this great nation, and God, freedom, legacy, in that order.